The day had been utterly routine: shopping, dinner, and a quick errand before heading home. Jason needed a lift to retrieve his car from the mall's basement floor, and I agreed to drive him. We entered the elevator, selecting B2 without giving it much thought. The doors slid shut with a faint hiss, and the soft hum of the motor filled the small, enclosed space. As we descended, something about the ride felt slightly off, longer than usual, as if the elevator was sluggish. A soft chime signaled our arrival, and the doors opened. At first glance, the parking lot seemed strangely dim. The overhead lights cast weak, flickering beams, leaving long stretches of darkness in their wake. Jason stepped out hesitantly, glancing around. "Wasn't this area packed with cars earlier?" he muttered, his voice tinged with confusion. I followed, my unease growing. Rows of cars that should have been there had vanished. Instead, the lot stretched endlessly, empty and silent. Jason's hand darted toward the button panel inside the elevator, his movements frantic as he jabbed at the glowing B2 button. No response. The buttons seemed lifeless, unresponsive. "What's going on?" he asked, more to himself than to me. We exchanged anxious looks, realizing we might be stuck. With no other option, we decided to walk through the parking lot, hoping to find another elevator or an exit. The silence was oppressive, the kind that made you feel like sound itself had been drained from the air. Every step echoed unnaturally, stretching far beyond what seemed possible. Jason tried calling out, his voice bouncing weakly against the concrete walls. Minutes stretched into an eternity as we wandered, confusion mingling with dread. Then we saw him, standing at the far end of the hallway. A man in a security officer's uniform, his figure barely discernible in the dim light. The officer stood still, blending into the shadows at first. His posture was rigid, almost mechanical, and his uniform looked slightly worn, as if it belonged to another era. Jason waved nervously, raising his voice. "Hey, we're looking for an exit. Can you help us?" The man didn't reply immediately. When he did, his voice was calm yet unsettling, like he wasn't just responding to a question, but warning us of something deeper. "You shouldn't be here," he said simply. "It's better to go upstairs." His words hung in the air, heavier than they should have been. He gestured toward the emergency stairs nearby. Jason hesitated, glancing at me for reassurance. I nodded reluctantly, and we followed the officer's lead. The stairwell was dimly lit, narrow and disorienting. The walls felt unnervingly close, and every step seemed to resonate louder than expected, as if amplifying the tension that gripped us. The officer led the way, his movements silent despite the concrete floors. Jason whispered to me, his voice trembling slightly. "Doesn't this feel endless to you?" I agreed. Each turn of the stairwell looked identical, as though we were trapped in a looping maze. The faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead only added to the surreal atmosphere. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the officer gestured toward a door at the top of the stairs. "Go through here," he said firmly. His tone carried a finality that stopped us from questioning. Jason pushed the door open, and we stepped into another parking lot, brightly lit and bustling with cars. The stark contrast took me a moment to process. It was as though we had been plucked from one reality and dropped into another. "Thank you," Jason began, but when we turned to address the officer, he was gone. No sound, no trace, just an eerie absence. Jason called out repeatedly, scanning the stairwell and the lot, but he was nowhere to be found. As we stood in the bustling parking lot, the stark normalcy of the scene felt like a cruel joke. Jason pointed toward his car, parked exactly where he had left it. "Everything's back to normal," he muttered, his words hollow. I couldn't bring myself to agree. The air was heavy, and my instincts screamed that this wasn't over. Determined to make sense of it all, we retraced our steps toward the emergency stairwell, hoping to find answers, or at least a trace of the officer who had guided us. But as we reached the door, it was sealed shut. as though it had never been used. The unsettling feeling in my gut grew stronger. Jason hesitated, glancing around nervously. "This doesn't make sense," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Just as we were about to leave, a soft rustling sound drew our attention. From the shadows, an elderly janitor emerged, pushing a rickety cart filled with cleaning supplies. His face was lined with age, and his eyes held an expression that seemed to pierce through our unease. "You're not the first ones," he said quietly, his voice gravelly but deliberate. Jason stiffened. "What do you mean?" he asked, his tone sharp with desperation. The janitor looked at us for a long moment before continuing. "The basement floor you found, it's not on the plans. Never has been. But people stumble onto it, always by accident." He paused, lowering his voice. "And when they do, they never come back the same." My pulse quickened, and I struggled to form words. "What happens to them?" I asked. The janitor shook his head slowly. "Some get out, like you. Others..." His voice trailed off, but his expression said enough. "You should leave. Forget about it. The more you think about it, the more it'll pull you back." Jason started to argue, but the janitor raised a hand, silencing him. "If you're smart, you'll take my advice. Leave it alone." Without another word, he pushed his cart down the hallway, disappearing into the shadows as though he had never been there. We left the mall in silence, but the janitor's words echoed in my mind. Forgetting seemed impossible. The experience clung to me like a shadow, always present in the corners of my vision. And yet, a part of me couldn't help but wonder what would have happened if we'd stayed longer on that lost floor